But the developed countries like America or like Europe, we have 7 cars every 10 people.
Yeah.
So in the rest of the world, as they are going to develop, they are going to go from 1 car every 10 people to 7 cars every 10 people. Nairobi, for instance, now they have jams of 3 hours and a half, 4 hours, with 1 car per people.
Yeah.
When we will have 7 times that number of cars, it's going to be absolutely impossible. It's crazy.
Right.
So we have to build up a system that is based in public transport, mass public transport for the main bulk of the population, when you have to take the car because the trip is special and cannot be served by public transport, you have to take the car. But we have to build Metropolis in a larger scale with a mass public transport, which is the backbone, is the skeleton.
Yeah.
The grey infrastructure, what we call the grey infrastructure, no, which is the transport, is the skeleton of a metropolis.
Yeah, well, that brings me to what's happened then in Brazil, because that's sort of researching when I'm getting ready to talk to you is that this comment about the fact that something like 80% of the population of Brazil lives in these large cities, and that 80% of those large cities happen to be these slums. And of course, that then tied, in my mind at least, to these protests that were launched back in June, largely not just because they were wanting to spend a lot of money on the upcoming Olympics and World Soccer, but particularly because of the fare increase that they were proposing for the public transit system. And it was that fare increase that really was the catalyst for bringing out literally hundreds of thousands of people into the streets of Brazil protesting that. So I kind of see this as, I'm wondering, is this the world that we are sort of headed to? And if it is, how do we then avoid that ultimate world so that we don't see 50 years from now what we see repeated in Brazil, repeated in the United States, repeated in China, repeated, in Africa? How do we do that?
Well, Latin America has reached a level of urbanization which is close to saturation. In developed countries, in America and in Europe, we have 75% or 80% of the population living in cities, no? And in Latin America as well, almost 75% of the population live in cities. So in Latin America, that level of urbanization has almost been reached. In the rest of the world, no. You know that the figure is that in June 2010, humankind reached the 50% people living in cities.
Yeah.
So if we are 75% and the average for the whole world is 50%, there are many countries that are still at a situation of 30% urban, 70% rural. That is the influx of people going from rural to urban that we have to respond. No, in Brazil that's not the case. They are already quite urban. The problem is that public transport. If you want to apply the cost of the service to the population, you are going against equity, because that population cannot afford to pay the full cost of public transport. No? So you have to subsidize public transport. And to subsidize public transport, you have to have the money to share to subsidize for it. In Europe, we subsidize 50% of public transport. When I pay my fare of my bus in Madrid or in Paris, I am only paying 50% of the cost
of it, yeah.
Yeah. So that is why I take the bus in Madrid instead of taking my car, because it's cheaper. I don't have to park. I don't have to fight with the traffic and so on. Everyone has the car, but then you prefer to take. There was a Lord Mayor in Latin America that said development is when people don't take the public transport because they must take the public transport, but because it's better.
It's better, yeah.
The private transport than the car. So why do we subsidize? Because when we are in a jam, No, when we reach congestion, and the definition is congestion is when you put one car more, the all other cars lose more time than the benefit of that car more. No, when you reach congestion, the time spent in a jam has a cost. A few years ago, it was around 9 euros per hour. No,
Okay.
if you multiply that cost for all the jams, for all the time spent in the car, the cost for society, not only for the guy there, the cost for society is so huge that you rather pay 50% of the fare of that guy to take him out of the street,
Yeah.
because that will make the whole economy more efficient, the whole city more efficient, and even more equitable, because the people that cannot afford high cost of transport will have a better ride. That's the problem of Brazil. That's the problem of many developing countries, that the government administration do not have the money to be able to subsidize. So in Brazil, as it is not subsidized, and it was going up, and they saw the amount of money that they were spending in the World Cup and the Olympics and so on, they really revolted. Why are we spending this money for this kind of games instead of using it for what we need? No,
Right.
the future is having a mass public transport well built and subsidized in some level that will make it affordable and preferential for the use of people. We should not prevent people having cars. They should have cars, because when you want to go for dinner with some friends late at night, there is no public transport that should provide for that kind of trip. So you must have the freedom of the car, but you should only use the car when it's required and needed and used for your everyday trip. And that's the share of transport, the share of public transport against car transport. And in European cities, we are in 55% of trips are done by public transport. And that is extremely sustainable, no? In the long run, is efficient and sustainable.
Yeah. So what's the role of the World Bank in this? If does the World Bank provide the funding to improve to improve transit there, or do they provide guidance? You have a team maybe that goes into some of these cities and says, here are the best practices, here are the vehicles, here's the routing. This should be bus rapid transit. So what's your role in this? I mean, what kind of effective role can you play in addressing this?
Well, the World Bank knows that it has to change its role. No, the role in these last 50 years was providing money for projects. No, but more and more these countries, there is much more money around internationally. No, the governments, every government has its own development agency. America has USAID. The French have the Agence de Développement. The Chinese are putting a lot of money around the world for this kind of thing. And there is private money as well. Whenever there is a service to be provided, if there is demand that can afford to pay for that service, private money wants to. So the World Bank 50 years ago was the only ones to have money around to provide for these investments. Now there is a lot of money around. So the World Bank money is more and less in proportion to all that money. So the World Bank is shifting the approach from being a bank of money to being a bank of knowledge.
Okay.
So what we do is we talk to the governments, we talk to the ministers, to the president, and we say, in your metropolis, it would be sensible to do this, this, and this, no? And so if they think that the suggestions are reasonable, and generally it's introducing public transport, Ortiz, buses, trains, rails, and so on. If they think, then the World Bank gives loans to those countries that they have to repay, but loans that are backed by an economic efficient and a social equitable policy, and the payment of those loans is easy, and they are easy loans. They are not expensive loans. So we are providing for them money to do the right thing in the metropolis and the cities, no?
Yeah. Well, see, I guess here's what my question is. I'm a little confused on is because if we've got this money, obviously, if you're an investor, you're looking for a return on your investment, a reasonable return on your investment. Obviously, the World Bank would like to have its money paid back and probably some interest as well, so that it can grow that fund and those types of things. But then I see, for example, in Brazil, there's this free fare movement where the populace says, we shouldn't have to pay a fare. That transportation should be free. So how do you balance the need for a populace that believes it has a right to free transportation with the capitalists over here who say I should earn a fair return on my investment for providing the infrastructure for this service? How does that? It seems to me there's a real clash there.
Well, no, you should separate the problems, no? Obviously, if you are lending money and you are a private bank, you want the returns of that money with the rate of returns that are at this moment in the market, no?
Right.
That's not the case of the World Bank. The World Bank is not a private bank. The money of the World Bank is provided by the governments to help other countries to develop. So the World Bank is not looking for the return of its money at the same rates as in the financial market, no? The investments of the World Bank are not looking for benefits in terms of money. They are looking for benefits in terms of economic development of those countries and social development of those countries. But if that money comes from a private bank, obviously they want the rate of return of the market, because if not, they will invest in something else.
Sure.
And not, no? So that is a problem of how you pay the finance of those goods, no? Of that infrastructure, of that service. The other is a social policy. It's the subsidy policy that I was talking before.
Okay.
If you want everyone to pay the full cost of the service, then you don't have a social policy. It's just an economic policy. Everyone pays what is consuming, no?
Right.
And in the other hand, if everything is free, then you are providing a free service for everyone. You should find a way in between, no? Because something which is absolutely free is going to be abused, no? And so it is fair to pay a fare for the use of a good and a service.
Right.
That fare should be in an amount that you are able to pay, and you have to take into account in what you pay as well the benefits that you are producing to the rest of society. By using a bus, I am not using the petrol of my car. I am not polluting the environment. I am not congesting the city. I should be entitled to a benefit for the good I'm doing, right, instead of the guy who's taking the car and is consuming how many gallons per mile and so on and so on. So that is an equilibrium. And that equilibrium is away from the financial discussion that you must pay for the capital you're using, the market rate of finance. No, it is a social issue how much money you want to put into that kind of subsidy and how much you can put and what is the fair rate. It's a different thing. I am not for free rides, no? But one of the problems of the city, and we call that road pricing, is the fact that as space in the city is free, there is a tendency to abuse it with a large car and to use the car for everything and so on. So that in many cities, like in Stockholm, Singapore, and London,
yeah.
They say, well, this space is extremely valuable. The cost of producing the infrastructure of this space is extremely high, and if you're abusing that space, you should pay for it.
Yeah.
So you pay £6 getting to London and so on. That's road pricing, no?
Right.
If in any European country, I did that because I was in charge of that in Madrid a few years ago, if every car that comes into Madrid pays €1, $1.30, no?
Yep.
The transport, public transport in Madrid could be free.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And that way, the guys which are abusing that space are paying for the guys which are not abusing that space.
Yeah. Right.
And so that is what a transport policy is, no? To look for the equilibrium of the cost and the use and not the abuse of limited resources.